All right, we'll go ahead and get started with our workshop today. So hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Good rainy afternoon. Hopefully you all are staying dry and safe somewhere during the storm, and hope that you're doing well. My name is Andy, and I am the Assistant Director for Global Programming here in Global Engagement. And I'm really excited to have with me today Lana Bello from UCSC Financial Affairs, who is going to work with us and explain how to use Glacier Tax Prep for all of us here who are non-residents in order to be able to properly file our federal taxes. So for the next 45 minutes or so, Lana is going to be leading us through a presentation to explain a little bit about how taxes work in filing them as non-residents. And then at the end, we'll have a little bit of time for any questions and answers. But without further ado, Lana, take it away.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you for inviting me again to present here. I think my information will be very helpful to our non-residents and kind of helps them to navigate this complicated federal tax system. I recognize few names, very happy that you're able to join and learn more about this process. Okay, so here's okay, so today we're going to talk about taxes in the US, and we have many taxes in the US, such as federal and state and FICA and sales and property and many, many more. Today, we only be discussing federal individual income tax. So if you have an income, you will have a tax, and that's what we'll be discussing today. And of course, I will cover some basic federal and US tax returns information, forms, tax filing. Especially important, I will cover the difference between residents and non-residents for tax purposes. We'll go over a Glacier Tax Prep system and what help is available. And I'm also gonna give you more details about fellowship scholarships based on the questions I receive from students. So who is collecting our federal income tax? Why in the first place we need to deal with all this tax filing? So in the US, federal tax is collected by Internal Revenue Service. It's a governmental agency responsible for federal taxes and enforcement of tax law. Here I attach the link to the IRS, and it's by now it has a very helpful website and covers a lot of information and provides a lot of free valuable resources. For example, if you cannot use Glacier, that we will discuss later, you can file federal tax returns for free by using link from the IRS website. We will not be covering California state taxes, but for your information, I also attach link to California Franchise Tax Board. That's a government agency that collects California income taxes. And that website is also by now is very helpful, and they provide free tax filing services. So as many of you know, Glacier does not provide California tax filing services. So if you go and follow this link, it's very simple way how FTB now allows you to file taxes for no cost. Okay, so what is gonna happen? What is taxable income? What do we need to worry about? And most of you familiar with compensation wages. This is the payments for services performed as employees. And also you're probably familiar with non-qualified scholarship and fellowship. That's when you were required to complete Glacier in the first place, because UCSC already determines that your fellowship and scholarship is taxable. And there is a bunch of other income that you may not be exposed yet, but maybe you will be in the future, as capital gains if you sell stocks, dividends, bank interest, self-employment income, say you started to work for Uber or Lyft, some gambling and prize and awards. Everything, pretty much everything that you get is getting taxed. And so Of course, how does IRS knows that you getting this type of incomes and payments? Here in the US, all employers are required to withhold taxes from your wages. And also here at USC, we provide scholarship payments and fellowship payments that are not part of the employee program, but we also require to withhold taxes. So each employer provides forms W-2, 1099, 1042-S directly to the IRS and reports all your earnings, all your payments, and taxes that were withheld from your salaries and payments. All banks and all financial organizations also report your payments and income to the IRS. And all US individuals who receive income during calendar year required to prepare tax return, which is a summary of all of your income and tax payments. So if you have any taxable income from US source, you must file US tax return. There's a few exceptions that we're not going to be covering in this presentation. Please remember, even if you claim a tax treaty exemptions and didn't have to pay tax treaty exemption is not automatic. IRS still have to approve it. So you have to file US tax return. So in the US, our tax year is a calendar year. So always think of it as from January until December. In general, the deadline is April 15, but sometimes it falls on the weekends. So this year we have deadline on April 18 for 2022 tax returns. Everybody is allowed to file an extension to file US tax return until October 15, but you actually have to physically apply for extension by mailing the form or using your tax provider who will do it for you. So now we're getting closer to the most interesting part. There are two tax systems in the US tax system for residents and non-resident alien tax systems. To make it more complicated, non-resident aliens tax system divided on taxes for non-residents are taxed as residents and as non-residents. So before I jump to this complicated stuff, I want to bring your attention to the Glacier tax summary that maybe most of you are familiar with. So when you start receiving payment from UCSC, you get notified by me and requesting to provide Glacier tax summary. So I'm going to point on a few items on the summary to show you how this document also can be helpful for you to understanding taxes when you prepare US tax return. Then I will do my presentation. And then at the end, again, I will show you this tax summary. So you will be able to, comprehend it on a better level. So this is just an example of Glacier tax summary. In the right corner, you see it spells out all the days this person was in the US. It shows the date of entry and estimated date of departure. And if your departure date expires, I usually chase you and ask you to update the date. Right here, it's tax residency status. That's the status we'll be discussing during our next few slides, which is gonna divide foreign nationals for non-residents and residents. And I will explain the difference. There is also a part where it shows you when you become resident alien. And it's important to know because its taxation is different for residents. Also, this person receives 3 types of income. She works as an employee, she receives fellowship scholarship, and sometimes she presented with prizes and awards. So she has 3 types of income. So when you're receiving something from UCSC, it's important to divided into in a proper type of income because it's taxed differently. And that's why sometimes we chase you and tells you, oh, you included wages, but you didn't include scholarships. It's every column is taxed differently, and it has a different impact on your annual tax statements and on your tax return filings. So that's why we collect all this information. It helps us to determine how to tax you at UCSC and what documents to provide you. All right, so let's start with US tax system, and it requires to prepare Form 1040. US tax resident system is tax everybody here in the US and worldwide income, regardless where you were present in the US or outside of US. And this is applicable to all US citizens, all green card holders, which we call permanent residents, and resident alien for tax purposes. That's what we will be discussing in the next slide. And that's what I just showed you on this summary, where we determine your residency status, non-residents versus resident. Tax residents cannot use Glacier Tax Prep. Glacier Tax Prep is designed specifically for much more complex non-resident tax filing system. However, as soon as you become resident, you're also subject to different benefit and a different tax rates, and it's all US tax service providers are familiar with US tax system, so you will be able to find help from any CPA company, tax provider company, online services, and here also included link. IRS provides you with federal tax filing for free too. So it's a lot of information on IRS website. It spells out all the details and answer all the questions if you want to learn more about US taxation for residents. So now look at this, resident alien for tax purposes. So now you're not a green card holder, you're not a US citizen. How you end up in this pile of US tax resident system? So the magic formula is designed by IRS, is called the substantial presence test. I included the link from the IRS website where you can find more information about substantial presence test, but the formula is very simple. What IRS requires to look at your current days in this year, looking back to preceding year and dividing it by 3, then looking back at second preceding year, dividing it by 6, we combine all your days and we calculate total days in US. So if you have more than 183 days, you tax residents and you deal with US tax system for residents. If you have less than 183 days, you're non-resident and you're working with Glacier. There is, of course, you all know there is exceptions, and students on F1 and J1 visas, they are not resident for the first 5 calendar years. Even if they want to be residents, they're not allowed to be due to their status. Also, J1 non-students, mostly like scholars here, they also do not become residents until they meet 2 out of 7 years test of presence in US. But everybody else, all visa holders have to use this formula. And as soon as they meet the substantial present test, they tax as residents. So now let's talk about non-residents. As is in prior slide, we look at this. Okay, you're on the F1, a J1 visa, J1 non-scholar. You may disregard resident for a while status because the first 5 years you don't need to worry about it, and for J1 visa you don't need to worry for the first 2 years. So now you non-resident for a while you're here in school. So let's talk about this non-residency. So non-resident includes income only earned in US. So, for example, if you came in US in the fall and you work in your home country from January until September, and then you came in US and start working from September to December, if you were resident, you would be taxed from January to December. But if you're non-resident, you only taxed for the period of you being here from September to December. And Glacier Tax Prep is specifically designed for non-resident alien tax because every home country, every date when you arrived here and all the days you left US for some reason, they all have impact on your resident status, on your taxation. So that's why Glacier collects all your travel schedule and visas information. And eventually, when you start working on your tax return, you prepare Form 1040 NR. It pretty much stands for 1040 non-residents. Remember, resident was just Form 1040, and non-residents form with 1040 NR. UCSC provides Glacier Tax Prep for non-residents through our Glacier accounts. So the easiest way for you to log in your Glacier, and you will have a free access to Glacier Tax Prep. Here I included also a link for Foreign National, kind of where UCSC combine all the resources that are available for Foreign National kind of a payment processing. And if you're interested in understanding how this process works here at UCSC, you can review it. Also, they have a link to Glacier training materials, like if you have difficulty understanding how to complete Glacier. And because Glacier needs to determine your status and tax treaty exemption and tax, it will require you to collect information before you start working on your tax return, such as passport, visa, social security, or your taxpayer number, your entry and exit days, and annual income forms. So we will discuss everything today. So I think you will have a better understanding by the end. So passport, you all have passport, visa, make sure it's a current visa. Social security, if you don't have social security and taxpayer number, you will not be able to file tax return. It's just going to be lost. So you have to attach Form W-7 with your tax return and follow W-7 instructions how to complete it. So do not send your tax returns or mail tax returns without social security or ITIN number. So US entry and exit dates will be required to confirm your residency status. Sometimes you have access to Glacier and you start working and Glacier tells you, nope, we cannot do your tax return, you became already resident. So there is no reason to panic. You just go to IRS website and use IRS website software to prepare your tax returns. Okay, now we're talking about Form W-2, 1042-S. 1099, it's rarely, I've never seen students, scholars receive 1099 here. So we're not going to be covering this. But let's talk about W-2 and 1042-S. I actually getting a number of questions for the last 2 weeks when students start working on the US tax return in Glacier and start chasing me for W-2 because Glacier tells you have to have 1042-S and W-2 to start working on your tax return. Well, W-2 is only for employees. So you have to have a UC Pass dashboard access. You have to receive monthly or biweekly by check in order to get W-2. So if you work for UCSC as employee, and if you received salary, you go to UC Pass dashboard, and under taxes, you can find your W-2. If you only receive fellowship or prizes, awards, or if you was a contractor and was providing some other services to UCSC, you're not gonna have W-2 from UCSC. If you work for somebody else have to provide you with W-2. Who received 1042S? So if you was employee, work for UCSC and have access to UC Pass dashboard, and you had tax treaty exemption, you will get Form 1042S. For example, I give example from a person from China. China allows you to have exemption of $5,000 from taxes. Say you made $20,000 per year. So you're gonna have two forms. One will be your 1042S that will include non-taxable income, which is exempt by tax treaty exemption, in this case, $5,000. And the rest of $15,000 will be included on Form W-2. So you have to look for two of them. Also, everybody who receives scholarship and fellowship, taxable or treaty exempt, so will receive Form 1042S. I'm going to cover on the next slide, I'm not included it here, but if you're a resident and you got scholarship and fellowship, you're not going to receive Form 1042S. And the reason is because residents are taxed differently from non-residents. Non-residents have rates, okay, single rates, no question, this is how you tax to the rest of the year. Residents have a lot of different tax rates, depends on each person income status. You could be married, your spouse can be working, you can have children. So each of those circumstances will trigger different tax rate. University cannot predict those rates, and we cannot determine rates for residents. That's why UCSC is not required to withhold tax from fellowship from residents. So you will not receive Form 1042 if you receive scholarship or fellowship income while you were resident for tax purposes. So if you are non-resident, you will be given access to this Glacier Tax Prem homepage, and you will answer a few questions, and it will decide if the system will prepare your non-resident return, or if you don't qualify, you became resident. The beauty of this Glacier Tax Prep system, and that's why we highly recommend it using for non-residents, because it's sponsored by very experienced tax experts. And they've been doing non-resident tax filing since the beginning of their career. So they know exactly how to help you with non-resident questions. They have a link. They're available 24/7 days a week, especially during busy season. And this year, they provide live webinars where they can ask you questions through the whole March and April timeframe. So I included all the days, live GTP workshops in March and April, right here at the bottom of this slide. So when you log into GTP, you will be able to register. I don't know if you like, I'm not sure about the registration, but you'll be able to get to that webinar. They provide dates and times. I receive a lot of stack questions, but remember, we as payroll of UCSC, we don't provide tax services. It's actually against UCSC policy to give tax advice. And that's why please address all your tax prep questions to this Glacier Tax Prep tax experts. So non-resident return, let's highlight what is important to remember. When you prepare non-resident tax return, you only worry about US income. Do not include any foreign income. So even if you work for UCSC, you started to work in US in June, then in September you had to work outside of US for 2 months, and then you came back. as non-resident, you're not gonna be taxed for the time while you were working for USCSC out of different country. So now let's talk about fellowship and scholarship income. So in the US, there is a two type of income that calls qualified fellowship or scholarship and non-qualified. Qualified usually are designated for as a tax-free to covering your educational expenses as tuition, books, supplies. And usually you get paid for this through financial aid. Non-qualified is taxable. It's everything what is not related, such as books and tuition. For example, housing, room and board, travel, research, any clerical help you provide, equipment used for other purposes than you use for the classes. So all these non-qualified scholarship fellowships are taxable. And if you requested to provide Glacier tax documents, it means UCSC already determined that your fellowship is taxable. What the confusion comes when you don't get paid tax on fellowship and scholarship while you're resident. So while you were non-resident, we withhold 14% from your scholarship. And then suddenly you don't get withholding and you're happy because now you don't have to pay tax, you get 100% payment. So the fact that you received non-qualified payment is taxable. It's just, as I mentioned earlier, you're not required to, UCSC is not required to withhold tax. You are required to put it on your tax return and determine your tax rate based on your personal situation. Like, remember, resident can claim the dependents, spouses, they can have multiple jobs because their spouse can have a job. So every tax bracket is different. So you will have to determine it by yourself. That's why CSC does not withhold taxes for your fellowships. Also, it's very helpful. I think it's this link. So I provided you with the link that it also from IRS website that provide you with all details how to report your fellowship and scholarship if you became resident. And I already discussed this, that if you were asked to provide Glacier tax documents, it means you receive taxable scholarship and fellowship. So I want to go over these two tax summaries report. It's the same person, and I want to show you the difference in taxation when person was converted from non-resident to resident. So while in this case, she arrived in 2021, she didn't meet her residency status because she's on F1 visa and she's taxed as non-resident. As non-resident, she's taxed on her wages at rate of singles. Non-residents cannot choose different rates, they cannot claim dependents. It's always the same rate, single. As a fellowship recipient, she was supposed to be taxed at 14%, but because she comes from a country that has a tax treaty exemptions on fellowship for the first 5 years, she is exempt from tax. So if you look at this, it shows exempt. And if you look at other income, which is taxed at 30%, it shows taxable. So when you start working on your tax return, pull GlacialStax summary, and it's explain all the categories and how you're going to be taxed. So at least you will already know ahead of time what your results should look like. So now look what happens when the same person became resident. In this case, she came to US in 2015. She was in US for more than 5 years, even she still F1 student, and she became resident. So if you look at her wages, it says, how is she gonna be taxed on wages? And it says, I requested on Form W4. So residents complete Form W4 and indicate everything what is applicable for them. They will tell, okay, I'm married, I have 5 kids, my wife works, I want to make sure we withhold tax on our combined income. So it completes this quite complicated Form W4, and this form is submitted to UC Pass. And UC Pass withhold tax, very different tax from his friend, because, for example, her friend was not married, but still had a kid. So their tax rate will be different, even if they both residents. So now look at fellowships. So she will still continue receiving fellowship as a resident. Now, instead of seeing 14% rate as a non-resident person, we're saying no tax withholding required. Great, now you receive 100% your scholarship is not taxed. But if you look at the next line, it says taxable. So you please remember to look at this document when you prepare your tax returns. So do not assume that because university didn't withhold taxes, it's tax-free. No, it's just university couldn't withhold your tax because we don't have this ability as wage category to calculate it based on your family circumstances. And again, here, because she's resident, UCSC is not required to withhold tax. But remember, tax on other wages was 30%. So while this person, for example, received $1,000 and university didn't have to withhold tax, it's still taxable. So now she needs to come up with $300 of taxes to pay on your US tax return. Yes, so I completely understand you now being confused and think it's unfair. I agree. All right, so now let's talk a little bit more about Social Security. Every person, as you know, in US has a number, and this number is connected to your identity with tax authorities. So when you complete your US tax return, you have a Social Security number. As an employee, you were allowed to receive Social Security number. But when you don't work for employer, you have to have a tax number to file tax return. That's why we request you to apply for ITIN number. As I mentioned earlier, if you don't have a number, do not mail your tax return. It's probably just wasting your time. It's going to be lost. IRS will not know what to do with your tax return because they only think as numbers. So in order for you to prepare correct tax return, even if you don't have a number, you just need to attach Form W7 and all required documents. So keep that in mind. So again, now let's talk about Form 8843. In prior years, I received a lot of questions about this, and I decided to include it here. Form 8843 is not US tax return. And I have no control over this process. I don't assist with this Form 8843. We have a website, they provide online wizard that everybody is required to complete this form while you're foreign national here in US. You don't have, even if you have no income, you're still required to fill this form. You don't need Social Security ITIN. It's some kind of formality that you need to do. So please do. Okay, let's talk about IRS. If IRS wants to contact you, it's always send letters. And please do not ignore letters from the IRS. They'll have a deadline. Usually you have 30 days to respond to that IRS. Open the mail, read the letter, and act on it. Also, IRS will not send you email unless you already filed your tax return in prior years and indicated that you want to be communicated by email. There is a lot of spam and fake emails from the IRS that targeting non-residents. Also, unfortunately, it takes more than 10 months to get refund. So make sure you put this on your calendar. Make sure to follow up on your refund status. If you receive different amount, check on it. IRS always explains rejections and modification by letters. There is a link where you can check on status of your refunds. And here's also I attach the link that handy to remember if you have looking for information. Also here's, for example, a link to IRS website about Form 8843 if our UCSC website wasn't enough for you. All the tax filing and this webinar will be saved on this ISSS website. And I think that's what I wanted to cover today. And like I said, all the much complicated tax specific questions will be answered by Glacier tax experts. So we'll be able to apply answer to your specific personal situation. And they're very quick with their responses. So please follow the help link. They don't take phone calls. They communicate to you only by that help link. And please attend their workshops. I attended them myself and I find them very helpful because they provide a little bit more details about tax filing requirements. All right, Andy, I think I'm done with what I had in mind.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Lana. We appreciate your time and sharing your knowledge with us about how to best file taxes for our students and scholars here. I'm going to end the recording now, but we do have a couple of questions in the chat box that we'll address, but I'm going to go ahead and end the recording and thank you everybody for attending. If you don't have any questions, feel free to connect with us on the ISSS website that I included in the chat box. That website has a list of different resources for non-residents about how to file taxes, and it's a great platform to start on if you are looking to answer some questions that you may have. And if you ever have any other questions, we do have another workshop coming up in a month from now, with Lana as well, that you can always come back to if you are still confused about filing taxes. But again, thank you, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.